Welcome to the Improving Development Evaluation Podcast. I'm your host, David Wand, and it's been quite a few months since my last episode because the governments of Canada and the United States have been very slow in providing me with the necessary Canadian performance measurement frameworks or their equivalent, or the government of the United States of America providing their activity monitoring, evaluation, learning plans or their equivalent so that I can go through their expected outcomes and see if their outcome indicators actually are validly measuring the expected outcomes that all of these wonderful international development organizations keep claiming on their websites with your money that they're achieving these outcomes. So sorry for the delay. In this episode, we're going to feature Oxfam Canada. You can learn more about Oxfam Canada at their website, oxfam.ca. There's been a few changes to Season 2. If you happen to be suffering from insomnia and you needed to get to sleep, you listen to my trailer to go to sleep. Just to repeat, I've done a little bit more focusing where instead of just one project, I pick a few projects so that the taxpayers know that there's a bit more money involved with these projects with the same organization. And also, people love to claim that they're achieving the Development Assistance Committee criteria when it comes to properly evaluating these international development projects. So, in that spirit, I will focus, like I have in the past, looking at whether or not these projects are achieving effectiveness, DAC criteria effectiveness. That is the outcome indicator actually validly measuring the outcome so that they can claim that they've achieved the outcome and the project is effective. The other criteria DAC uses is impact. That word is very vague, but what they mean at DAC is, okay, if you have achieved effectiveness, has it made a difference? And that can be interpreted several ways, but the way I look at that is compared to if the project wasn't delivering the services in some other part of the country. Did it achieve the outcome? Yes, but to such an extent that it was statistically significantly different, like the difference was super huge. And the only way to show that is to have a comparison group or a control group. Or if you don't have the money to do that, you could repeatedly measure the subjects, beneficiaries in the project to see if your outcome is being achieved, but it's steadily increasing over time. And you could then argue, yeah, the project's having some impact. And finally, the last thing that's changed a bit is you'll notice on my podcast website, there's a donate button, and there's also a buy me a coffee button where you can give me $1, $2, any amount you wish. That money, yes, it will go into my pocket, but I will then use it to buy performance measurement frameworks. They cost $5 in Canada. The United States, if I get the document, usually it's for free, but sometimes they charge for it. And also, if the money's going into my pocket, it enables me to spend more time to get more PMFs, more activity MEL plans or their equivalent, and produce more episodes more frequently on this podcast. The problem right now is the government has been very slow in producing these documents, despite the fact that your taxpayer dollars are already being spent on these projects where they had to submit before the money, your money, was dispersed. They had to produce a performance measurement framework to show how they were actually going to evaluate the project before they got the money. The same goes for the Americans with the activity, monitoring, evaluation, learning plan. So enough of that. Let's move on and look at Oxfam Canada. I'm looking at about over $12 million of taxpayer money. First project is called Care Connect, delivering services in the Philippines and Indonesia for a cost of $5,950,000. And the second project I'm going to look at in this episode is called, by Oxfam Canada, Camino Verde. It's being delivered in Guatemala at a cost to the taxpayer of $7,190,000. And you'll be shocked to see when we get to it, the limitations on their performance measurement framework. So let's first start with the first project, Care Connect. I'll give you a little background on what it is, and then we'll go through the outcomes and the related outcome indicators. So this is a project that aims to enhance empowerment, socioeconomic well-being, and enjoyment of rights for women and girls working in domestic care in Indonesia and the Philippines. Project activities include, number one, training domestic care workers on advocacy, leadership, and their right to decent work and living free from violence. Number two, conducting feminist research to generate evidence on women's rights and needs related to paid care work. It does so to influence national and international spaces effectively. And three, providing technical support to civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, to implement gender transformative, environmentally sustainable care programs. So that gives you a description of the project. Now let's take a look at their outcomes and their outcome indicators. Their first outcome is strengthen capacity of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, duty bearers, and the private sector to implement gender transformative initiatives to enhance women and girls' participation in various activities in the Philippines and Indonesia. The indicators for that are percent total of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, demonstrating confidence to implement gender transformative initiatives. They didn't ask the trainers who were training these women in increasing or strengthening their capacity to implement gender transformative initiatives. No, instead they went to the women who were receiving the training and asked them, how confident are you in implementing gender transformative initiatives? So as you can tell, this is self-reporting bias. It would be better if they went to the CSO trainers, people training the CSO staff, to ask them, how confident do you think the people you just trained are in implementing gender transformative initiatives? They didn't do that. So clearly it's not an effective measure of whether or not these women, after their training, had strengthened their capacity to actually implement transformative initiatives. The other indicator they looked at was the percent total of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, duty bearers, and private sector stakeholders, with skills to implement initiatives enhancing women's participation. Skills is a little closer, suggests, oh, this is great. They're going to actually measure their skills to implement initiatives. But if you read the indicator, it's not exactly clear how they're going to measure these skills. Did they pass a skills test? This needs to be included in the indicator. So they could add with skills as measured by a psychometric competency test on the ability to implement initiatives. That's what they should add. And there's no mention in the PMF of any psychometric test. The other problem is it's only measured at the end of year 1, year 3, and year 4. So in between year 1 and year 3, they could go off into the sacred bush and learn this skill on their own through YouTube, through colleagues, whatever. So that's the other problem with this indicator. If you look at their PMF, it's not measured frequently enough, and it's not even measured objectively. So it's not an effective measure of whether or not they strengthen their capacity to implement. So that's not good. Next outcome is improved social attitudes by key project stakeholders in support of women and girls' participation in economic, educational, political, community, and leisure activities in the Philippines and Indonesia. Here the indicator is percent total of women and girls who feel that key stakeholders in their region support women's participation in a variety of spaces. So women and girls are asked if project stakeholders have improved their social attitudes supporting women and girls' participation. There's no comparison group of women and girls to ask outside of the project about non-project stakeholders who also could advocate for women and girls. So even if the attitudes go up in the right direction, they could go up anyways, regardless of whether the project is there or not. The other indicator for this outcome of improved social attitudes by key stakeholders is you could ask the key stakeholders directly. And that's what they do in this next indicator. Number of key stakeholders able to formulate and carry out plans to advocate for women's participation in a variety of spaces. So here they're getting at the stakeholders, but it shouldn't just be the number. It should also be the percent, because you want to see the percent go up because the total number could change of key stakeholders. So we also want to have the percent. But even with the percent going up, able to formulate and carry out plans, how do we measure their ability to formulate and carry out plans to advocate? How do we look at that? Right? How do we look? So if we take a closer look at the PMF, you will look at the column that says data sources. All it says is, quote, annual project records. We don't know if inside of those project records there's an actual objective psychometric test of their ability to advocate for women's participation. Right? So we don't know. So that needs to be put in the indicator as measured by an objective measure of the ability to advocate using relevant skills and knowledge, some sort of test. We also want to know that key stakeholders who advocate in other parts of the country where this project is not operating, they could also be advocating quite well. So again, impact, we don't know unless we can get a comparison group of stakeholders in another part of the country that are not involved in this project. So that's the other problem there, is we don't know from the source column here, it just says annual project records. That's not good enough. We need to know if there's an actual objective measure. Then you could use it in the project, and then you could use it on stakeholders who are advocating in other parts of the country, and then you could compare the two on the percents using that objective test, and then you'd be in a good position to claim effectiveness and impact, right? The next outcome is strengthen understanding and motivation of Canadians to support efforts that recognize, represent, and respond to the rights and needs of care workers in the Philippines and Indonesia. The first indicator for that outcome is percent total of Canadians who understand issues related to recognizing, representing, and responding to the rights and needs of care workers in the Philippines and Indonesia. So how do we show that the Oxfam Canada awareness campaign was responsible for the observed increase in the percent of Canadians who understand the issues? This is a little bit more difficult. You could do a survey, but you want to compare before you start it, do the survey, and then while you start the program awareness campaign, measure again, and then measure again. So this would be a good, actually, indicator if you could do that. And what we need to do is make sure that there's a baseline, and then after the awareness campaign, continuously measure. So this is actually a pretty good way of measuring it. There's no issues with this indicator. It's pretty good. The other indicator they're using, and I have to check on the frequency of measures for that indicator. It's not clear here. But for the second indicator, the number of Canadians who have taken an online action related to recognizing, representing, and responding to the rights and needs of care workers in the Philippines and Indonesia. This is a good indicator. They only measure it at year 1 and year 4, but it's still acceptable because they could install a pixel on their website that tracks people going into their website to take an online action, either donation or a comment. And they could do this before, during, and after the awareness campaign. So this is pretty good way of measuring it. I haven't checked the data sources from the PMF, but I'm going to give them a break. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that's how they're doing it for that. Now we have to get back to the Philippines and Indonesia and look at the next outcome, which is strengthened capacity of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, paid care worker unions, and paid care worker groups to advocate for women's rights and needs related to paid care work in the Philippines and Indonesia. Here, we have some indicators. The first one is number of CSOs, particularly women's rights organizations, paid care worker unions, and paid care worker groups who, quote, meaningfully participate in policy influencing spaces related to paid care work. Here again, the outcome is strengthened technical capacity to advocate for women's rights. But do they measure the technical capacity to advocate? No. Instead, the outcome indicator is looking at how do they feel with respect to meaningful participation in influencing and advocating. They could feel just great, but there's a bias. A better measure would be asking the recipients of their advocacy. For example, they could ask the politicians on the other side who are being advocated to do something about women's rights and needs related to paid care work, and ask them over time, these organizations that are lobbying you or advocating you, briefing you, how are they doing technically? Are they making sense? Are they articulating the issues clearly to you in terms of verbally written documents? That would be an option they could do instead. It would be a bit more objective. It wouldn't be self-reported. And also, back to meaningful participation, even if that goes up in the project, there could be non-project civil society organizations that are also reporting meaningful participation in lobbying in terms of policy, influencing spaces, right? So again, this would violate DAC criteria on effectiveness as well as impact, right? The second indicator they use is perceptions of civil society organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, paid care worker unions, and paid care worker groups who are confident in their ability to hold duty bearers to account in implementing existing care policies. Again, they're asking about their perceptions with respect to their confidence in their ability. Why not just measure their technical ability directly instead of perceived? Again, this is a failure to measure DAC criteria on effectiveness. The indicator is not a valid measure as to whether or not they were effective in achieving the outcome, which, remember, is strengthened capacity to advocate, right? So that's a problem there. The next outcome is enhanced competencies of paid care workers, particularly domestic care workers, and their employers to recognize and respond to the rights and needs of paid care workers in the Philippines and Indonesia. So the first indicator for this outcome is percent total of paid care workers with the skills and knowledge that allow them to promote their rights and needs. So we are in the right direction, skills and knowledge, but how do they assess the skills and knowledge? There's no mention of an objective psychometric test, whether it's self-reported or measured objectively. It's not. That's the first problem. The second problem is it's only measured years 1, year 3, and year 4. So even if they get the technical knowledge, competency to recognize and respond to the rights and needs of paid care workers, it might not be statistically significantly greater. In fact, meaning limited impact. So that's also the way the PMF is shown. There's no clear mention of a control group or a comparison group. So impact would not be achieved by DAC criteria. Second indicator, percent total of employers with the skills and knowledge that allow them to promote the rights and needs of paid care workers. So again, we don't know, same problem. We don't know if it's an objective measure of skills and knowledge or if it's self-reporting. And we also don't have any comparison groups, so effectiveness or impact are not being achieved here. Also, they're only measuring the employer's year 1, year 3, and year 4. So they could acquire these skills and knowledge maybe at the end of year 1, between year 1 and year 2. And we don't know when they're not measuring. Next indicator, percent total of paid care workers who are confident, scale 1 to 5, in their ability to respond to their rights and needs. Again, same problem. Doesn't measure directly their ability to respond, but you could keep this in perceptions as long as you had it complemented with an objective measure of ability to respond to their rights and needs. That way you could see if ability is rising at the same time, technical ability is rising objectively, as well as their confidence levels. Seems logical. It would be kind of nice to do both. But as you can tell, Oxfam Canada is avoiding objective psychometric measures. They like to ask people how they feel, which is okay in some cases, but ideally you want objective measures for the reasons I've described. The next outcome, enhanced participation of women and girls in economic, educational, political, community, and leisure activities aligned to their own choice in the Philippines and Indonesia. The first indicator is percent total of women who play a leadership role within an organized group in their community. Now, if you look at the PMF, they talk about, quote, a qualitative data collection of these women, but we do not know exactly how one concludes that this woman is, quote, playing a leadership role. And even if we did measure leadership validly, how do we know the project did a better job? That their percentage that are enhancing participation or leadership is greater than in an area where the project is not operating. So does not meet the DAC criteria on effectiveness or impact. The second indicator is the percent total women and girls who feel that they can freely decide how to spend their time and reduce hours spent on unpaid care work, scale 1 to 5. Now, feeling is biased. Again, not a valid measure of, let's take a look at the outcome, enhanced participation, right? So what they mean by that is that there's going to be a decrease in the number of hours spent on unpaid care work. Nothing wrong with that. So why not get them to report on their actual number of hours spent on unpaid care work? Now, if you ask them to self-report, it's a bit of a bias. You could have someone externally coming in. It's a bit intrusive, but at least you could get the number of hours spent on unpaid care work through a third party, right? And then you could compare that against a group of non-project women and girls. It would be very powerful in showing the effectiveness of the project. Now note, the PMF does refer to another indicator where, quote, number of hours reduced are reported. This is what they should use instead, along with comparing number of reduced hours of unpaid work for project women and for non-project women. So they do mention it, to be fair. So that's good. The next outcome is enhanced protection and promotion of women's rights and needs related to paid care work in the Philippines and Indonesia. Two indicators here: percent total of individuals who recognize, appreciate, and represent the importance and value of paid care work in Indonesia and the Philippines. So these are good attitude indicators. The problem here is it's only measured at year 1 and at year 4. So the percent increase could happen due to other factors other than the project. And again, no comparison group of individuals in other parts of the country who are not in this program. They could also recognize and appreciate and represent the importance and value of paid care work. That could also go up. So they need to have a comparison group. So the indicator is good on measuring effectiveness, but with no Comparison groups are infrequent measures. They only measure year 1 and at year 4. They can't really go on and claim that they're making a difference or claim that it's due to the project. The second indicator is percent total of individuals whose reflections show changes in attitudes towards gender equitable social norms in the care economy in Indonesia and the Philippines. Same problem here. They may have the right change of attitude in the right direction, but the frequency of measuring is pretty scarce and they have no comparison groups. So they can't really claim they're having any impact, and the infrequency of the measurement also is difficult for them to claim that the project is responsible for those changes in attitudes. The next outcome is enhanced empowerment, social economic well-being, and enjoyment of rights for women and girls in the Philippines and Indonesia. We have 2 indicators here. Percent total of women who have access to different economic pathway than the one that they currently are in during the past 3 years. These are great indicators, as you could show tracking and improvements in economic opportunities. Excellent. And the other one is percent total of women who perceive the quality of the activities they have undertaken as part of their personal development. That complements the previous indicator. So you could see that their perceived quality of social economic well-being is also improving. But the problem is, how do we show that those observed increases in percentages are due to the project, especially when only measured at year 1 and year 4? We could measure it at maybe every 6 months. That would be a better way of showing the project is actually effective. So that leaves my review, finishes it for the PMF for the Care Connect project. And as you could tell, the project clearly is not properly evaluating whether its outcomes can be achieved. So Oxfam Canada cannot make the claim, despite getting $5,950,000 in services delivered in the Philippines and Indonesia. They cannot make the claim for most, if not all, of the outcomes that they're claiming they're achieving. And I have made exceptions to that in the review, but I may revert back to that for a final comment at the end of this episode. Before we move on to Camino Verde at $7,190,000 that's going on in Guatemala, delivered by Oxfam Canada, you could tell from this podcast that we're dealing with the global south, which in most cases, except for the rainy season maybe, is hot and humid. And also from my analytics, a lot of people are living in the global south that listen to my podcast. So I'm going to promote some products which logically make sense for people who live in the global south or who live in Canada and the United States, work in international development, and hopefully have to go to the global south regularly to visit their projects. You need a good hat against the sun. You need some good sunglasses. And you also need some good t-shirts. So starting with hats, I would highly recommend you check out Eric Javits, ERICJAVITS.com to purchase some sun hats. And if you do so using my promotional code WANDCOOL t-shirts, WANDKOOL t-shirts, you will get a 20% discount off on any product you purchase from ericjavits.com. You can check in the episode notes for the website and any other information. When you do that, I get a 20% commission off the total purchases you make. And you might be wondering, protection from the sun, that's the best benefit for sun hats, and you get ultraviolet protection factor with a 50 plus UPF rating, blocking 98% of ultraviolet A and ultraviolet B radiation. These hats are also travel friendly, easy to pack, but retain their shape. So when you visit your international development project located in the global south, pick up one of those sun hats. The other thing you could pick up are some sunglasses. If you check out the website akila.la, akila.la. These you can also get in prescription lenses. They're all made from 50% recycled materials. If you purchase these sunglasses or any other products on their website through using my promotional code WANCOOL T-shirts. You get a 10% discount if you use that promotional code, and I get a 15% commission when you purchase any products using my promo code. So you have your hat, you got your sunglasses to protect yourself from the sun in the global south, but you also need the right clothes to be comfortable in that hot and humid climate. How about, sorry women, it's only a men's website, but for the men who are going to the global south, but I presume the women could also purchase these men's t-shirts. Why not? How about some men's polo tees and button-ups at hypernaturalstyle.com. If you purchase any of their products from the website, hypernaturalstyle.com, using my promo code WANDCOOL T-shirts, you get 20% off, discount off any product you purchase through my promo code, and I get a 20% commission of the total purchase you make when you use my promo code WANDCOOL T-shirts. So, what is so cool about these T-shirts at Hypernatural? Oh, they have a patent pending hypercool jade technology that, when it's hot, believe it or not, lowers your body temperature by 3 to 5 degrees. They are also breathable thanks to Supima cotton, and they are sold in premium retailers like Nordstrom. And were rated the best men's polo shirts in 2024 in Men's Journal, Forbes, and Esquire. So check those products out when you go to the Global South, or if you actually live in the Global South. That'll be pretty relevant. So moving on to Camino Verde. It's a project in Guatemala. It's pretty expensive. And what's the scary thing about this project is I got their performance measurement framework. But as you'll soon discover, before I get into details, let's get a title and a background on this project. Camino Verde, Economic Empowerment of Indigenous Women and Youth in Alta Verapaz. And it's in Guatemala, cost to the Canadian taxpayer
$7,190,000.
And to give you a brief description, the project aims to increase the economic empowerment of Indigenous women and youth in Alta Verapaz in Guatemala by strengthening business practices of small-scale enterprises led by Indigenous women and youth, and by developing an enabling environment for those enterprises to grow and prosper. The project contributes to increasing the entrepreneurship skills of Indigenous women and youth, as well as their access to resources and to markets. It works to increase the social, economic, and political engagement of key stakeholders on issues regarding their rights, leadership, economic empowerment, social justice, and the prevention of gender-based violence. Project activities include, number one, training on business and financial administration, environmentally and climate resilient production practices, and social responsibility. Number two, providing technological innovation packages. Number three, delivering awareness raising sessions to market actors and service providers on gender sensitive services. Number four, developing advocacy plans with women's rights organizations to influence public policies and programs. And five, delivering awareness raising campaigns and workshops to key community and economic stakeholders and local authorities to improve policies and programs in support of Indigenous women and youth's economic empowerment, rights, and environmental sustainability. And if you check at the episode notes, you can get a full description of these projects. I'll give you the links to the Global Affairs Canada project browser. So if you take a closer look at the performance measurement framework that I got from the Government of Canada, there are 14 outcomes. 10 of those outcomes have no indicators at all. That's pretty shocking for $7 million. Some of them were intentionally redacted. So if we look at their performance measurement framework for the Camino Verde project, they have 14 outcomes. But unfortunately, Oxfam Canada decided, or Global Affairs Canada, because they both have it. They have to produce this performance measurement framework before funding is dispersed, and funding is now being spent. 10 of those outcomes have no indicators. And I was informed that they refused to provide some of these indicators. So I launched a complaint with the independent office of the Privacy and Information Commission. I have not heard back as to whether or not they're going to investigate. So we just have to assume we have what we have. Only 4 outcomes remaining have one indicator each. So we can only look at those. And very quickly, if we look at them, we're soon going to discover that none of them validly measure the achievement of the outcomes. So let's go through these 4 outcomes that each have one indicator. Starting with improved capacity of women's rights organizations and Indigenous women youth groups to influence economic empowerment and rights policies programs, especially those that protect the right to live free from violence. So clearly from the outcome, they want to improve the capacity of individuals to influence economic empowerment. So it's a technical outcome. And what they do here is the indicator, as I indicated even in my first trailer for season 1, is they just take attendance. And here's the indicator. Number of women's organizations and women's networks advancing women's rights and gender equality that receive support for programming in this project. So at the very end, they're asking about the number of organizations that get support for programming. Fine, that's an output. They can show with the money that the taxpayer has spent that these organizations have actually received training on how to influence, quote, economic empowerment and rights and protect the rights to live free from violence. But there's no measure technical of their capacity to influence. Number receiving support is an output. It's not an outcome. So it doesn't measure the effectiveness at all as to whether or not this outcome was achieved. So that's not good. They need to have a technical measure because they are doing training. Costs you $7 million to deliver that training. So it'd be nice to see if these women, individuals in these organizations actually had improved their ability to influence, to lobby, to advocate, to advance women's rights. But nothing. Okay, the next outcome, improved ability of Indigenous women and youth to access. So its ability to access and apply innovative, clean, and environmentally sustainable production practices and technologies. Again, it's just not the number of people that show up. You have to show what's the measure of improved ability. The indicator, number of entrepreneurs, farmers, and smallholders disaggregated by age and gender, provided with financial and or business development services through the project. No measure at all of the outcome of improved ability to access and apply sustainable production practices. Nothing. So that's not a measure of improved ability. Therefore, it violates the DAC criteria of effectiveness. So if they're claiming on their website that these Indigenous women and youth have actually improved their ability, the performance measurement framework says, nope, garbage in, garbage out. You can't make that claim if you're going to use that indicator. You've got to use some more objective measure of improved ability. Next outcome, where they actually provide the indicator, strengthened, innovative, clean, and sustainable business practices in small-scale enterprises led by Indigenous women and youth. So it's almost identical to the previous outcome statement, strengthened business practices. Again, the outcome indicator is number of beneficiaries disaggregated by age and gender from climate adaptation actions supported by the project. Again, no measure of strengthened business practices. Number of beneficiaries supported is not a measure of the outcome being achieved. Finally, the last outcome, increased economic empowerment for women and youth, especially from Indigenous communities in Alta Verapaz Department. Again, the outcome indicator they have here from the PMF, number of beneficiaries disaggregated by age and gender from climate adaptation actions supported by the project. That is not a valid measure of increased economic empowerment. Show me the money. That would be a good measure of increased economic empowerment. So this project, despite over $7 million, has no evidence that it's supporting achieving any of the 14 outcomes they claim they're trying to achieve. Because 10 of them, they're not providing any outcome indicators. And for the 4 outcomes left where they did provide outcome indicators, none of them are valid measures of effectiveness being achieved, or effectiveness because the indicator does not measure whether or not the outcome was achieved. That is, was the project effective delivering the services to achieve that outcome? So what we have here is, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 indicators that I talked about earlier on the Care Connect project, Oxfam Canada cannot make the claim that this over $12 million of services that they were funded to deliver in these developing countries have achieved the outcomes that they claim they're achieving on their website, as the PMF is poorly designed. So what I will do, as I have done in the past, is I will send the performance measurement frameworks, the 2 of them, along with my checklist that I just went through with you in this episode, to the Minister for International Development, as well as the Conservative and NDP critics for international development, because it doesn't matter where you are on the political scale, who you vote for, either Conservative, Liberal, or Social Democrat. It doesn't matter, because you should always be concerned about your tax dollars making a difference or being effective using the DAC criteria. And it's clear from Oxfam Canada with these 2 projects that they are not being effective or making any impact. So the recommendation would be clearly to stop funding to Oxfam Canada until they revise their indicators, and even better, start collecting the data that shows that they're being effective, and not only effective, that they're making a difference compared to if they didn't have the project at all, which is impact. You can also, at any time, email me at evaluatecanadaaid@gmail.com, and I'm happy to send you both the PMF for these 2 projects, as well as my checklist. Not only will these PMFs and the critique of these PMFs be sent to the Minister for International Development, as well as all of the shadow critics from all of the political parties that are shadow critics of international development, be sent these PMFs and the critique, along with the link to this episode recording. I will also be inviting Oxfam Canada to respond to my critique by sending them the PMFs and the critique of the PMFs and this episode. And they can respond in writing, which I will read out at another episode. And also, I'll also be inviting Oxfam Canada to the podcast to have a meeting to discuss their response to my critique. That's important, because you have to give them an opportunity to respond to the critique, and in particular, what they're going to do for these 2 projects, if they can, in terms of introducing proper outcome indicators. Because as we speak, money is being spent to the tune of over $11 million, and this project is still going on. Both of these projects are still going on. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the other option is to just stop the funding and stop the project. Or the other option, as I've said before, is just call them a charity and everybody goes home and there's no expectations of achieving any outcomes. And then if they do that, then we get into a debate as to what charities are important, which ones are not, and where do you cut the line in the sand as to who's going to get money and who is not going to get money.